Hey guys, this is Ben Smisher. Today for my film project, I'm going to be discussing the editing in Stanley Kubrick's classic horror film The Shining. Now before we delve into The Shining, I want to go over some basic overviews of what exactly editing is and how it shows up in movies. Film editing in its most basic form is the selection and arrangement of the shots and sounds that go into movies. The basic tool for all film editing is a cut. And a cut happens when an editor determines an in point, a point where a scene starts, and an out point, a point where a scene goes away and stops being shown. And each in point and out point that occurs is what we call a cut. And we actually call it that because back when film was shot on tape, editors had to manually cut the strips of film at the desired points to be able to give the desired cut effect. And now, of course, we can do all that digitally, but it's called a cut because back in the day you had to physically cut the tape. Now, film editing helps us with a number of different purposes, but most often it helps in one of 5 different ways. It helps us to organize fragmented actions and events. When we're shooting our film, often we don't organize it and we don't shoot it in narrative order. So editing helps us to take all the raw footage that we gather and sequence it in a manner which makes sense to form a story. It helps us to create meaning through juxtaposition, which means that the sequencing provides additional context beyond just the explicitly stated narrative. The way you edit it might give an additional awareness to the audience of how a character might be feeling or how they react to a certain event. It creates spatial relationships between shots, so it helps us to kind of understand where we are in the story, where we are in the setting, and gives us a sense while we're moving through scenes of where we are so we don't get lost or feel like we have no idea where the characters are while they're moving. It helps us to create temporal relationships between shots, and it also helps us to establish and control the pacing and rhythm of our movie. If we want things to move fast, we can do a lot of quick smash cuts, and if we want things to slow down, we can draw them out, go for longer takes, and really slow down the editing process that way. Now, you're going to see a lot of basic editing techniques show up again and again in pretty much all films. Some main basic techniques that you'll see are the master shot, which is when you have a single long shot scene, usually shot continuously as one take, that sort of gives you an overview of where the scene is and where we are headed based on like who's involved in the scene, where the characters are located, what the surroundings are looking like, and like how they are in relation to each other. And so it gives you sort of a background for as we go into more detailed cuts. A shot reverse shot is a conversational technique. Usually when 2 characters are involved in a conversation, the cut will start with an over-the-shoulder view of one character speaking, and then as the other character begins to speak, or if we want to get the other character's reaction to what the first character is saying, we'll flip to a reverse shot, so an over-the-shoulder shot of the other character to sort of get that back and forth dialogue going. Cross-cutting is when you cut back and forth between 2 simultaneously happening events. Usually if they're not happening at the same location, or even if they are and you're not able to pick them up effectively in one shot, you'll cross-cut back and forth in like a quick manner so that you understand they're happening at the same time while not having to use the same camera angle for both. Now this is often confused with, but should not be confused with, intercutting, which is when cuts are inserted in a manner that inserts the narrative or adds another sequence to it. Now this is often demonstrated in flashbacks. This scene of Danny in the hallway is a perfect example of a master shot. We've got a wide lens view of the entire hallway, the elevator doors, and an exit door on the other side of Danny. This sort of, again, like the master shot definition, it gives us a wide view of the setting. It lets us know where we are in space in the hotel, and it gives us sort of an implicit understanding of where Danny is traveling as he goes around on his big wheel. Another example of editing comes in the opening montage of The Shining. Here, Kubrick uses a lot of dissolving editing, which is when one scene dissolves or slowly fades into another scene. And this occurs in a montage style as Jack Torrance is driving up the mountain to get to the Overlook Hotel for his interview. And so it again gives us a sort of sense of isolation as we travel up and up and up the mountain to get to the Overlook Hotel. And the dissolving creates a coherent and connected feeling between all the images, and they are connected because we're traveling on a road up to the Overlook Hotel. So you can see as we go through these images, and these are not sequenced in order, but you can imagine these shots all dissolving into one another as we travel up the mountain to get to the Overlook Hotel, shown here. Now we previously mentioned dissolves as the montage shot in the opening scene, and like I said earlier, it's when a current shot fades away and is slowly replaced by a shot from the next scene. PlotandTheme.com tells us that Kubrick specifically uses these dissolve shots to connect scenes to each other and also to even zero in on mindsets of certain characters. So the dissolve shots are strategic, and they contrast starkly with hard cuts, which are basically just regular cuts when an image cuts from one to another. When an image cuts from one to another, normally it has a sort of hard edge to it because it's contrasted with the dissolve shots. And Kubrick also uses this interesting technique called L and J cuts. Now, L cuts are when a shot shows a source of audio and then cuts away to an angle that doesn't show the source of the audio, but the audio is still playing. And J cuts are the exact opposite. J cuts occur when a shot is shown and audio is playing, but we can't see where it's from. Then the cut occurs and we are shown the source of the audio. Kubrick manipulates these a lot in the opening interview scene where Jack Torrance is being interviewed by Stuart Ullman for the job of the caretaker of the Overlook Hotel. And Kubrick uses these sort of disorienting camera cuts, L cuts, J cuts, and audio manipulation to disorient the audience, to get us wrong-footed, to get us uneasy, because that's a very good building block for a horror film. And we can see here, this is where that takes place. Now, we can also compare some of the editing styles that Stanley Kubrick uses in The Shining to some techniques he uses in 2001: A Space Odyssey. One thing I specifically thought was interesting was Kubrick's use of sort of a fade-into cut, where an image becomes another image using sort of the dissolving technique that I discussed earlier, but it's used in a slightly different style. In 2001: A Space Odyssey, obviously, the iconic image we can think of is when the bone dissolves into the satellite towards the beginning of the film. Now, CollativeLearning.com tells us that the sequence of satellites orbiting the Earth gives itself away as a representation of space warfare. Now, the very first sequence of satellites we see is that dissolve cut from the flying bone in the air. And right before that cut, we saw the bone being discovered as a weapon for the first time by one of the chimps. When it dissolves and the bone dissolves into a satellite in the shape of a bone, it signifies the satellite as a weapon just like the bone. Now, Kubrick uses a similar style in The Shining, but the main example I can think of this is the scene in which Jack is looking at the maze, or the diagram of the maze inside the Overlook Hotel. Now, he's looking at this maze. It's a map drawn to scale and exactly representative of what the actual maze looks like, but it's a mini model inside, and he looks down at the maze, and then we get a shot of a top angle down of the maze diagram that zooms in and in until it turns out that we're actually looking at a drone shot of the real outdoor hedge maze. And we zoom in and in on this outdoor hedge maze shot until we see two little figures walking around inside the maze. And those figures are Wendy and Danny. That's right. And so this is a really interesting example of Kubrick using cuts and editing to sort of manipulate the time and the space that we're in The Shining to, again, sort of wrong foot us and get us in sort of like a dream-like, trance-like state, to really give us an understanding that things at the Overlook Hotel are supernatural, that there are other forces at play here, that we are in space which bends time and manipulates surroundings. Again, these are just some basic examples that I can think of. Kubrick is obviously a master and very intentful when he does these things. There are many more examples. You can dive way deep into rabbit holes about all of these editing techniques and Kubrick's purposes behind them, but these are just some basic examples that I chose. And these are the sources I used to find these examples. Thank you so much for watching.